Hello, everybody in the room and on the internet. So I guess today I call this class Tricks and Tones, or Tones and Tricks. I'm not sure exactly how it goes. And it's funny, you know, you spend all your life trying to learn how to play this thing, and then eventually somebody says, hey, you're a pretty cool guitar player. Can you teach? And it's like asking a scuba diver if he can cook. But I'm going to try. And I guess the best way to do this, and in my experience, is to just tell you what I know, and hopefully you have some questions, because this could be a really short class if you don't. So I guess what I'll do is I'll just kind of give you my idea of what it takes to get good sounds. And I've been doing this for quite some time, and I still love to learn about this stuff. I still love it. I'm 35 years old. I guess I sort of started taking this serious when I was probably about 13 or 14. So I don't know how many years that is, but when you tell stories, I guess you got to add a year every year. You have to add a year. So I've been saying 10 years ago, but really it's now like 20 years ago now. So it's been a long time. And I've learned from, you know, some really great players. I live in Nashville, and I get to play on some cool records every here and again, and I watch, you know, and I see what people do. So I've kind of learned from some really great players. So I'm just going to start from the top and just kind of run down where I start with this whole thing. Is that cool? Cool. Playing a Telecaster here, but sometimes I'll bring a Les Paul or, you know, something else, a 175 if, you know, we're not going to get too loud and it's not going to make the guitar feedback. Some of you guys I recognize from last year. I think I recognize you maybe. No? No?
I was here last year. I don't know if I was in one of your seminars.
Well, cool. But, yeah, so right now I'm playing a Telecaster, and it's pretty low output. It's not a real loud guitar. So, I mean, that's what I like. I don't like really loud guitars. Like, if you go to Guitar Center and pick up a Les Paul or a 335, well, maybe not a 335, but most of the guitars you pull off the rack at a normal guitar shop, they have very loud pickups. And it's not really my vibe. I guess I'm kind of old school. But I like the pickups to sound like they used to in like the 50s and 60s. They weren't really loud. But what that allows you to do is it allows you to get a nice amp and get that amp working really nice. With loud pickups, you'll never ever stop driving the front end of your amplifier. Does that make sense? Like there's preamp tubes and there's power amp tubes in a decent tube amp. What you want, like where the magic's at, is in the power amp tubes, at least as far as I'm concerned. So I'm trying to not hit that first gain stage harder than heck. I want to save something for that power stage, if that makes sense. And that leads us to a whole other discussion of why I need all these things on the board, because what I'm trying to do is get the amp sounding optimized. But in church settings, we all know that to get your amp sounding really good, you got to turn that sucker way up, but you just can't do that in church a lot of the times. But so let me see here. Everything's off. My whole pedal board is off. Nothing happened in there. That's not a bad little clean tone. But if I had it my way, I'm about to turn this thing up really loud. I don't know if sound guys, if that's going to hurt anybody, but I'm going to show you where, in a perfect world, when I'm not playing at church, you know, I have different size amps that I use for different venues, depending on the size of the room. I can bring a small amp, a big amp for playing outside, but I usually like to crank the crud out of that thing. And that's where I start. Before anything happens on this pedal board, I want it to start there. So I'll just give you a little demonstration of that. This is a little Dr. Z, what's it called? A Maze 18, I think. It's 18 watts. 18 watts is loud. Think about this. 5 tube watts is louder than a trumpet at full. Have you ever stood next to a trumpet player? Dude, those dudes are loud. Well, that's what your little 5-watt tube amp is doing. If you have a 15-watt tube amp, you know, and you crank that thing, it's loud. I mean, it is loud. Someone's going to get upset. And it might happen right now. I'm doing, I'm just cranking the master volume. And you see, I guess they want me to talk in this thing. You know, you get these amplifiers with master volumes. I'm not a big fan of them. The less knobs, the better for me. I want to be able to adjust, you know, some tone options. Even if it has one tone knob and a volume knob, I'm usually pretty happy. And I like the older amps. I like older AC30s and old Fender Bassmans. That's what I use, you know, on records. And they're easy. You know, they don't have very many knobs. You turn the thing up or you turn it down. But I'm going to go ahead and just crank this master volume. And what that'll do is it'll effectively bypass the master volume. It just makes it, you know, a one-channel amp. Then you have your gain knob, and that's just going to be my volume knob. So I'm going to crank that thing all the way up, and we'll see how this thing sounds. All right, now I'm turning the volume down a little, but the master volume's up. So here we go. This is about where I like to start. If I hit it hard, it's going to get crunchy. It's not quite there yet. It was tuned when I bought it. Yeah, so that's pretty loud. In fact, this little deluxe would probably drive even harder. I should have plugged into that guy, but that's what I'm after right there. When I want to hear an overdrive sound, I don't think of these little boxes on my pedal board. That's not what I'm after. I'm after that. You hear it's just got a sound to it. And here's another thing about turning up your amplifier. It gets noisy. But what happens when you push these amplifiers, and nobody understands this. You know, you play at church and everybody's like, turn it down, why is he so loud? Well, the thing is, it actually does sound better. There's no denying it. Because what happens is it adds some compression, so your dynamic range, you know, on a spanky clean amp is this big. You push the amp a little, and the dynamic range comes into about right here somewhere. And also, like the EQ knobs on there, the louder you turn that amp up, the less they do. Like, it's really hard to mess up a really cranking amp. Like, you could turn those knobs and you're going to hardly even hear what they're doing because the amp is like doing its thing and it's sounding great. Like, when I listen to records, you're not hearing, like, great records. You're not hearing some fuzz pedal. You're hearing some great guitar and some great amp doing its thing. Is that making sense? So these pedals here, these overdrive pedals, I'm trying to fake that. Is that making sense? And if I can get that, I'm a happier camper. You know, and there's different ways to do that. Like, sometimes in churches, they'll build, like, isolation box. You put your cabinet in, have a separate head you run it to, or you just use really low wattage amps, you know, 5 to 10 watt amps. Even 10 watts, so is loud. I mean, that's 15 watts, and that's loud. You probably won't hear much of a difference between 10 and 15 watts. What do y'all think about that? Yeah? So, I mean, that's where I want to start. And here's the thing is, so that's driving if I hit it hard. And if I had a Les Paul, that would be driving about twice as hard, you know? And I use really low output humbuckers. I mean, it's probably not any louder than this guitar, the humbuckers I use. I use various different, you know, companies make low output humbuckers, but it's kind of my little secret. I just don't like loud pickups because I want the amp to do its thing. Is that making sense? If I can get the amp to do its thing. And a lot of times I'm trying to balance this out. I'm thinking of recording sessions, but I've got to, like, come back and think about how this works live too. But somehow you can meet in the middle. I try and bring what I bring to a recording session to a live session if I can. if I can get the amp sounding how I want and make everybody happy without old ladies getting mad and Tyler's leaving the church, all that stuff. You don't want none of that. So that's where I want to start. You know what it is? It's kind of like that. You all know who Malcolm Young is? Anybody? He plays in it's got. Well, in my head, that feller gets some of the best rock and roll rhythm sounds of all time. So that's kind of what I'm after, that kind of thing, that Pete Townsend kind of thing, where you want to swing your arms around. It's rock and roll, So that's what I'm after. And here's the thing. With that sound, you think, oh, why would you want to start with that? What if you want a clean sound? Well, you got plenty of options to get a clean sound. And also, here's something to think about. In a mix with the drummer and with the bass player going, what you think is clean sounds terrible usually. It just sounds plinky. But in a big mix, just a little hair on your clean sound sounds spanky clean in the mix, and it cuts through. But you just have like some little tone that sounds like this. Plinky, you're not going to hear that. It just disappears. It's missing stuff. I don't know what, but it's missing stuff. So that's where I want to start. And if I want it clean, I've got a few options. I could roll my guitar volume down a little on my guitar or on my pedal board. Usually here, I usually do that. If I want it cleaner, I'll roll it down here. And it gets... But it's got just a little hair on it. You know what I mean? And I can roll it up and get a little bit more hair if I want. You hear all those little tone changes that happen. And pickups, you go to your neck pickup, it's going to sound a little warmer. You can just leave it all full up and play soft. That's a nice clean tone to me. That's a nice clean tone. When I'm looking for a clean tone, I'm never looking for anything cleaner than that, because it just won't pop through a mix. Is that making sense? Yeah? So when people get mad at you for playing too loud, I understand. I get it. I get why you do it. But yeah, so I mean you try and keep people happy and get the sound you want. So you got options after that. You turn your amp down and it sounds plinky, It sounds plinky. And then you got to fake it with one of these overdrive pedals. And that's what I use there's two ways I use these overdrive pedals. One is I get the amp doing what I want it to do, and then I'll use an overdrive pedal quite light just to push the front end into mayhem of that amplifier. So that'll be my rhythm tone. If I can help it, that's my rhythm sound. That's my overdrive sound for all my rhythm playing if I need it. And my clean sounds. I'll roll it down a little or play soft, and that's my clean sounds as well. That's where I want to start in a perfect world, but we all know it ain't a perfect world. So what I'll do now is I'm going to turn this down, and I'll show you what happens a lot of the times. Like, I ask for small amps, on backline. Well, I fly places with Brenton, and Brenton's the only fella I play at. We play at a lot of churches. So I'll ask for small amps, and sometimes I'll show up and there's a God forbid, a twin reverb back there. And I play pedal steel, and I actually love them for pedal steel because you turn those suckers way up and they sound immaculately clean. But as a guitar player, that's the worst thing in the world. I wouldn't mind a twin reverb if I'm playing outside. I'd turn it all the way up and nobody's gonna cry, but people are gonna cry at church. So I don't like that. I don't like that. So what I do is, you end up with that spanky clean sound, and I'll fake it. I'll find I have a few different overdrives. Actually, I have a whole bunch of them. I own about 25 different overdrive pedals. It's kind of a problem, but and the sad thing is they all sound very similar. Like one day I'll hate this on. I'm like, oh, I hate this. Put this on. Oh, I love it. And then a week later I think that sounds just like that other one. But yeah, it's just like Ghost in the Machine in a guitar player's head. Just the way it is. You just got to start living with it. So I'll fake it. I'm going to turn this amp back down, and you guys won't hate me anymore. This amp has a master volume, and like I said, I'm usually not a fan of it, but this one actually sounds not so bad. So I am giving it a little bit of hair using the master volume on this, but normally I wouldn't. You just have some amp with a volume knob, and you turn it up to a half, and it's too loud. But this guy, so that's still way too clean for me. I don't want to hear that. So I've got this pedal here. It's called a full tender. Sounds just like a tube screamer, though. There's tube screamer type overdrives, and there's all kinds of other ones, but I like tube screamers. Some people say they give you that little mid-range hump, but in a mix, that mid-range is what cuts through. It might sound a little ugly in the mid-range when you're jamming by yourself, but in a mix, mid-range is what pushes a guitar player through the mix. So I'm not afraid of a little mid-range hump. But this thing sounds very similar to a tube screamer. And in fact, I think my tube screamer may sound better today, but yesterday I thought this did. So this is without it. That's with it. It's not a whole lot of difference. You hear it though? Just adding a little further. And I'll actually even back it down more. That's a nice sound, and I can live with that. I can fake it with this pedal. So what happens is I'll never turn that pedal off. If I get into a situation where I can't get the amp doing what I want it to do, I'll leave that pedal on and fake it the whole time. And in fact, this amp may be probably a whole lot louder than anybody in this room can use at church, me included usually if I'm at my family's home church in Arizona. I can't do that. But we did build in the stages. The stage is about this tall, and we built on both sides isolation cabs with mic'd up cabinets in it. So you crank the living stuff out of that thing. You can just crank it, and it sounds great, So that's an option if you can, get away with making your amps work. And, they don't always have to be big, expensive amps. Fender makes some little tube amps that sound great, some little 15-watt amps that sound really good, a couple different versions, and they sound good. You don't have to have a 60s Marshall Plexi, although it would be super cool if you did. So that's where I start. That's where I want to start. If I can't get it with the amp, I get it with the pedal. Is that making sense? So my whole world is surrounded around making that sound happen or faking that sound well. Is that making sense? That's where everything starts for me. If I can get the... Go ahead.
I got a quick question. You got a master volume and you got a gain, right?
Yes. Master volume and a gain is this question. I have to repeat all the questions over here.
So what if you were to put your master volume around 3/4 or 3 o'clock and then your gain up around 9? Wouldn't you get a lower volume, harder sound?
Yes, see, but what's going on there? His question is, why don't I optimize the master volume trick? Like, that's why it's there, right? You can turn the volume down and then turn the gain up and get some overdrive sounds. That's your question. Why not do that? Well, what I said at the beginning is that you've got two stages of gain happening in a tube amp. You've got your preamp gain and your power amp gain. So the preamp tubes are like this big, and there could be 2 to 3 to 4 of them in there like this big. And then you got your power amp tubes that are like this big. They're over on this side. And what you want, what sounds the best, and I'm not alone on this, a lot of people think this, what sounds the best are the big tubes rather than the little tubes. Does that make sense? So when you're driving with that master volume, what that means is you're driving the heck out of these little baby tubes. before he even gets to the power section. So when it hits the power section, it's hardly seeing any volume at all. You know what I mean? It's hardly seeing anything. So all this really cool magical stuff that happens over here doesn't even get a chance to happen because it's getting, it's getting hit so hard here, it's squashing it, and then you're getting barely any volume here, and then you're just using this to just get your, the volume where you want it. How I like to do it is just turn the thing up so hard that these are screaming, they're begging for mercy, these big ones. And that's where the magic's happening. At least on all the records I like to hear. That's the guitar sound. Is that making sense? Any other questions about that? No? Yes?
Have you ever tried using attenuators?
I have, yeah. They don't do a bad job. I've heard some that sound better. In fact, I've bought probably like 4 or 5 different attenuators in my life, and not one. But there's the what's it called? The train wreck one, I think, was probably one I liked the best. But I don't know. They all do something funny. You think you're like, oh, that's finally it. And then, through your second song, you're like, that's not right, But it's just, a lot of it may be on my head. And I'm not opposed to admitting that. But I feel like they do funny things to your sound. If you use them lightly, I think they work well. But the way we have to use them in church situations, they squash it so hard, because you got to have such low volumes at church levels. They squash it so hard that I just don't like them. If you use it barely, like on the very smallest amount, just to take the edge off the people on the front row, I think they work okay. But other than that, to get them at the levels we need them to get, I don't find them too useful. That's just my opinion, though. Yes?
Vox comes out with this HC4 little tube amp.
That little white tube amp Vox makes, yeah.
For guys that are in smaller situations like you were describing, but still want to push some tubes, have you played with that?
I have played with those little amps. So the question is, what do you think about those little Vox 4-watt amps? Those are great, man. Any little 4-watt tube amp is going to sound cool, usually, unless it's broken. But yeah, you know what I like to use in churches? I actually keep 2 in LA. I've got 5 of these little things, and I keep 2 in LA, and I've got 3 in Nashville, and I use them solely for churches. I've got these little. This is my little secret here. I feel like every time I tell this secret, they get more expensive, but. They're these little Silvertone amps that were made in the 60s, and they're rated at like 12 watts, but they feel more like 8 watts to me. And they're little. I think it's what is it? 1842 or something. There's a couple different models that are just the little 112s. They sound really dang good, and I turn those suckers all the way up, and nobody really gets upset at me at churches. And they sound really nice. The only thing is, with small amps that you've got to get used to is that with a big amp, with a big box, big speaker cabinet, big pine, great sounding speaker cabinet, you're going to get a lot of low end energy off the stage, which is really cool. It's fun and it sounds nice. But when you're miking that with the 57 this close to the speaker, none of that translates into your PA. None of it. You know what I mean? That's just it's not happening. But you feel it on stage and you miss that. But in the house, it's very similar sound to what they would be miking with the big cabinet anyways. Is that making sense? You do miss a little bit of that with a small amp, but in the house, it's a good compromise because you're sounding good out there, and hopefully you're facilitating worship in a better way because you're not killing everybody on stage anymore, and it's sounding better out there than normal. Yes, sir. One more question.
If you've got a 15-watt tube amp, you got to get the volume down. What would your preference be over isolation cabinet or speaker, power attenuator, using the drive channel on your amp, or using the overdrive pedal?
Okay, what's my preference to get a 15-watt amp sounding how I want? In the right situation, you have it setting in the perfect world, you have it setting next to you, and you have it cranked so you can get some energy happening between your guitar and your amp. that's a perfect world. Non-perfect world, best situation is you're at church and you want it to sound great. You build yourself a little box. You put that thing in. And you crank it and you mic it up in there, and then you listen to yourself through a wedge or through your in-ears. That's the next best thing. That's the next best, in my opinion.
The next one would be the pedal, or do you drive?
No. Using the master volume on the amp is pretty much never an option for me. I never really do it. And I don't. I'd rather it be just like a monitor, and I control the sounds from my pedal board. I'll use an overdrive pedal to fake it if I can't get the amp doing what I want, because at least then I know what to expect. I know what it's going to sound like. But go ahead.
And you prefer the pedal over an attenuator?
Yeah, probably. If I have the amp on stage with me and I can't turn it up, I'll fake it with the pedal, just because I know how to do it. I know how to get by with it, And every amp is different. You sometimes end up with one of those triple recto things with like 90 knobs. I can't stand those amps. And it doesn't mean that if you have one, you love it. Doesn't mean it's bad. Some people, I have some great guitar player friends who love those amps. I just don't know what to do. I see all those knobs like, they freak me out. But yeah, it's just so many knobs. I don't know what to do. And then there's knobs on the back. Like, what do you do with those, But, yeah, so I'll just get a sound that I can live with and then kick this overdrive pedal on and just leave it on the whole time. Does that make sense? So, yeah. Cool. All right, I'm going to move on. Is that cool? Any other questions about loud amps or anything? No? All right, so that's where I start. I want to start there. How are we doing on time? Half hour. Wow. Time goes fast. So that's how I start. And so I'll just kind of run my little pedal board. I used to travel with this really massive pedal board when I was younger, because when I was playing with a lot more artists then too, so I didn't want to have to change things up every time I had to go out on a weekend, So I had everything I needed for everybody I was playing for on this big pedal board at the time. So, like I'd go out for a weekend with somebody like Brenton or somebody, and I'd use 2 things on the whole pedal board, but the rest is there for next weekend. You know what I mean? So my back started hurting. Pared it down to this little guy. And I'm really happy with it. You just have to get a little bit more creative with your playing and less. And for sessions, I have this really big pedal board that I bring along. But for live playing, this is what I use, and I love it. It's been healthy for my back. So guitar, low output pickups, even if it's a humbucker guitar. I don't want to kill the front end. Like, remember that whole discussion, the preamp tube discussion versus power amp. I don't want to be hitting those preamp tubes so hard that it's killing it before it gets to this section. So I'm saving something for that section. So I use low output humbuckers and low output. Fender guitars are normally always going to be lower output. So, they're probably right off the rack. But any kind of thing with a humbucker, those humbuckers are loud, man. All of them, pretty much, off the shelf. They're just too loud. And there's lots of companies. Seymour Duncan makes one that I really love. It's called the Antiquity. It's like an older, they make it looks old and beat up, but it's really low output. I think they're like 8-9K or something, like 8K maybe, I don't know. But not hardly any louder than a Strat or a Tele. And then I go into, first it hits this compressor. And I've got a couple different compressors. And when in a live situation, I can't tell the difference between any of them. They all just compress, And I don't ever use compression nowadays. I used to be one of those leave it on kind of guys, but I did a session a couple years back with and I was the second guitar player. He was a really great guitar player, a legendary player, session guy in Nashville. And he pointed it out to me that he could hear in my clean sounds that he could hear the compression. I said, "Can you?" And I listened, I was like, "You're totally right. I can hear it." And it freaked me out a little bit because the amps are already compressing. It was too much compression. So I kind of just stopped using it. And I use it, though, for slide. That's when I use compression. When I play slide guitar, I'll use compression. So I'm not even, if I'm playing some chicken picking kind of thing, I may use a little bit of it. Like without it, the notes just don't pop at as much. But with it, it's kind of giving a bit more volume boost than I normally would use. It just like makes everything snappy. That's kind of just a Nashville thing. But unless I'm playing chicken picking or slide, I'd never even turn it on. And after that, it goes into this first overdrive, which is like a tube screamer that I use either as just a boost to kick a driving amp into my first like kind of overdrive lead sound. If the amp's cranking, this is not much overdrive, but it's enough to push that amp into like solo territory. You know what I mean? Not really Steve Lukather solo territory, more like I don't know, David Grisham or Cry of Love kind of thing, you know. But it's a really nice sound because it just pushes the amp all the way to 10 without me having to go to the volume and going to 10. From going from 8 to 10, that's what it does basically. Or I use it to fake the overdriven amp sound. So that's that overdrive. And secondly, it goes into this Noble's overdrive, which is similar to a tube screamer-ish, but has a little bit more bottom end. And a lot of times I'll do this. If I can get the amp working how I want it to work, then I'll figure out which one of these overdrive pedals sounds best in the room. Like one has a little less bottom end, another one has a little bit more bottom end. So this is the first one. Now here's the second one. Very hard to tell, but that second one does have a little bit more bottom end. Just slightly. Probably hear it on the neck pickup more. You hear that? It has just a slight bit more bottom end in the sound. So if the room's boomy and dark, I'll use this one for my lead sound. I'll use the first one that has less bottom end. If the room is really bright sounding, I'll use the other one. And they sound so similar, and their gain structure is quite similar. I just set them quite light. There's not a whole lot of overdrive happening there. And I'll just pick between the two, depending on how it sounds in the room. And sometimes the same room sounds different. It's like Ghost in your head, you know, Ghost in the Machine. Sometimes the same room you play every day that sounds dark sounds bright all of a sudden for a day. So I'll pick between the two, depending on that. Is that making sense? You getting that? And if I really, really need to go Steve Lukather, I'll just kick them both on. And at the same time, and it gives you like this way over the top sound. So that's like, if I have to go there, I can go there. I'll just kick them both on. Any questions about overdrive pedals and gain? Yeah.
Do you find there's really like a huge difference if you get like, say for instance, like a tube screamer, like a modded hand wired? Do you find a huge difference tonally?
All right. Here's what I think about that. Oh yeah, repeat the question. The question is, can I tell the difference between like a modded overdrive pedal, like a modded tube screamer, like Keeley mods them, Analog Man mods them. Everybody's modding all these overdrive pedals. And I think that if you have a spanky clean amp, like your amp sounds like you might as well be pointing to like a Roland Jazz Chorus or anything, which aren't bad amps, I guess. Some people really love them. I don't love them. But if you have to, you're plugging. And the thing is, if you're plugging into a twin and you can't get it louder than right over half of one, you might as well be playing through, you know, the PA or anything, because it's not sounding like a guitar amp should sound, you know. But if you're at that level of with your guitar amp, and that's the sound you're working with, you hear those differences. You know, you hear all those differences that people do in a tube screamer or in some, you know, they mod those Boss Blues drivers, which I think sound good anyways. They're all cool, you know, sounding little overdrive pedals. But you hear all those things in a spanky clean amp. But if you get your amp working, it almost doesn't matter at all what your overdrive pedal is, because all it's doing is pushing the front end of your amp a little bit and giving you some gain. All it's doing is making your amp work hard. That's all it's doing. And you can't, and like I said, the harder your amp is working, the less all those knobs do, you know? That's why everybody wants to turn your amps up, because it literally sounds better. Like, it's harder to mess up. You can turn your amp, you know, up to where it just wants to drive. If you hit it hard, you turn those knobs any which way, you're gonna barely hear what's happening. But you turn the amp down to it's spanky clean, every little minor move does something like, you know. It's just easier to mess up. It's easier to just get it right if you can get the amp working. But with the overdrive pedal, you're not going to hear those differences when the amp's working. And the question in the back.
How much difference do you notice between a 12-inch speaker and a 10-inch speaker?
Do I notice a difference in a 12-inch speaker and a 12-inch speaker? Yeah. Yeah, it's a bottom end thing, and if I'm playing, it just depends on it's a style thing, you know. Like if I'm playing like Texas blues stuff, I love to have an older super reverb with 410s. It sounds really great. It's punchy, you know. But if I'm playing a rock gig, that's the wrong amp for me, you know. I want something with the 12 or 212s, or you know what I mean. But it's just preference, and in the long run, it's probably all in my head. I can hear those differences just because I think I can, but I'm pretty sure I can. But in the long run, and it's all like it's historical, you know. Like in my head, I'm thinking historically, to get the right sound for this gig, what kind of gear should I be using? You know what I mean? Does that make sense? So I'm thinking, like, if this is a rock gig, historically, you use these kind of amps because they seem to do a better job. And I found a lot of that to be true. Like, what's happened historically has happened that way because it's better, you know? So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. All right, so I got to start moving here. What do I have, like 15 minutes left? 20? Okay, I'm going to start trucking now. No more questions. No, I'm just joking. You can ask questions if you want. All right, so that's the overdrive stage. And I'll never really turn on my compressor and an overdrive pedal at the same time, because if your amps are cranking and you have an overdrive pedal and a compressor on at the same time, it's so noisy. I mean, it's super noisy. So I just don't do it usually. I might do it if I'm playing through a spanky. Everything changes. When I'm playing through a spanky, like Roland Jazz chorus kind of sound, I'm just fighting. I turn everything on, try to make it sound cool. I don't know what I'm going to do, you know? But turn it all on, get some more in there. But so that's the overdrive pedals. After the overdrive pedals, I go to a volume pedal. Some people put your volume pedal before everything, you know, straight to your guitar. And some people put it after your overdrives. Some people put it after everything, your delays and everything. I find that I like it for live playing. I like it I like my volume pedal right after my overdrive pedals for two reasons. If I have both of these things turned on, and for like the way over the top sound, they're both on right now and you can't hear anything because I have my volume pedal turned off. But if I pull it up, you hear all that noise, that white noise. You turn them off, you know, just one's on now. And it's not too bad. That's bearable. But turn them both on. That's pretty noisy. And I just pull that volume pedal down in between songs so you don't hear that. You know, that's an easy fix for that. Some people buy those noise suppressor pedals. You've seen those? That's just another thing you got to have in there, you know, that could break or something. So I do this just rather than having one of those pedals in there. I just turn the volume pedal down. It's that simple. Questions about that? Mm-mm. Oh, and here's another thing. Why some people like the volume pedal before their overdrives is they can control the amount of gain going to your overdrive pedals. But the thing is that's in my head, that's a mentality of thinking that your overdrive is happening from your pedals, not from your amp. You know what I mean? So in my head, it doesn't matter what's happening on my pedal board. I'm trying to get the amp to do that, you know? So it doesn't bother me anyways. And here's the thing is, that if I do need to pull that trick, I do, and like I showed you earlier, I do it with my volume on my guitar. You know, if I need this, both my overdrives are on. And I want it to be just slightly less overdrive, I don't have to do it with this volume pedal. I'll do it right here. Do it right there. Making sense? So that's why I do that. Now I have both options. I can control the amount of gain from my guitar, and if I want it to be over the top gain and pull it way light, just get some wicked weird sounds, I can do that. So it's a lot of drive there. But it's not loud, so I have both options. Does that make sense? All right, so after the volume pedal, it goes into this delay pedal, and this is an eventide time factor, and I've been using this. I've got a couple of them. I've got one at home in my session rig, and I got this one. And I like them because you can set up presets on them. Like I've got, how many do I have? 1, 2. I've got 4 banks, and there's 2 presets for each bank, so that's, what is that, 8? Yeah, that's 8. That's 8 settings I have there. And it's really cool. I can set up different, wacky sounds, and here's another really cool option. It has this expression pedal thing that everybody says, why do you have 2 volume pedals? One's an expression pedal for this guy. But for years I used like any kind of tap tempo delay. And if you're playing Christian music, you basically have got to have a tap tempo delay, or you get fired. So I've used all the different ones, and they all do the same thing. They all give you tap tempo delay. And I used Boss DD5s for years. For like 10 years, I used those things. I used to use 3 of them though, and I have them all with different presets, so I didn't have to bend down and turn knobs really quick. But I never would like turn them all on at the same time. It'd be absolutely mayhem. But I have 3 of them just with different settings, and I would just turn one off, turn one, and they were all connected to one little tap tempo thing. But I do basically that with this, but. In all reality, in a live mix, when you're sitting there by yourself playing, you can hear all these little cool things this one does. But in a live mix, I don't know if I could tell the difference between those DD5s or this. It's just, it is convenient though. So, and those DD5s are cheap, like $120 on eBay or something like that. So, if you need a tap tempo delay, I'd suggest go that route. And I used to do this. Here, see, I have the option to. What am I on? So that's quite heavy. That's quite a heavy amount of delay, right? Well, with this, I can no delay. I can sneak it in to where I want. You know what I'm saying? That's cool. What I used to do with my DD5s years ago, and now they have this thing called the option pedal knob or something. You put it on there, you kick the little knob around, so you can adjust the amount of dry to wet sound. What I used to do is I used to just stick a razor blade and hammer it in there, right in the top of that knob so I can kick the top of it around. I do the same thing I'm doing now with this, but I do it with that little razor blade. Could get dangerous, but never hurt myself. But the cool thing about being able to fade in a sound like that, you could do really cool little tricks. So you got your tempo at that. So if you want to, you hit some massive like yeehaw moment, you can just like if you're hitting something like, then I can fade that in, and it sounds like 9 guitars are playing it. So I'm just fading it in, and it's doubling it, but I can sneak it in to the amount I want. I can even turn it up. So I'm doing volume swells with the delay pedal, really. It's kind of cool. It's a cool little trick. And I've got a couple different settings. So one's like, that's the tap. That was like as if this one. That's exactly what I tap. If I tap it, does exactly that. This one halves it. This one reverses it and just does some wacky stuff. This one reverses it, but without repeats. So it's like super Hendrixy kind of vibe. Oh, it just turned off. There we go. What was I was saying? This one reverses. And I can swell in between that. It's a really cool thing. You would think, where in the heck would you use that? I use it all the time. I really do. People don't know what's going on, and we're just like, and then I get out of it really quickly. I do it all the time. Then I got another set, the infamous dotted eighth note setting. You know, the ones that you could do all the ticka tricks. I'm not about to do it right now. I'm over it. So, and then I've got a slapback delay because I like old honky-tonk music, and I always try and sneak a little bit of that sound in there, and that's... Little slapback delay, like the old Sun records. And I have it set up to a tap tempo. If I want it, I can get it like really fast but in tempo, but hardly ever do that. Let's see, what else do I have here? Oh, this is a filter pong. This one's kind of cool. Just kind of filters it. It's kind of a little cool little trick, but can't do that with any other delay pedal. I hardly ever use that though. And that's my delay settings. I try not to go overboard with delay anymore. I'm trying to just get my pocket playing well and not have to fake it with all the sounds anymore. Every once in a while, people want to hear those sounds, so I got them in that little box. And after that, it goes to how much time we got? 5-10 minutes? Okay, cool. After that, it goes into this reverb pedal. And here's another thing. I don't use this a whole lot, but I'll use it when I'm playing slide, and I'll use it when I'm playing slide to fake a pedal steel sound. I don't know if y'all know what pedal steel is. It's like you sit down and play it like this, and it's got pedals and knee levers. It's my favorite instrument of all time. I love it. But I can't take a pedal steel everywhere I go because it's big and heavy. And I don't want to check it, so I'd have to carry it on. It weighs like 60 pounds in the case. It's heavy. So I don't take it everywhere I go, but I'll fake it with this guitar. Or I'll grab that guy for a minute. So what I'll do is I'll turn on a little compression and this reverb pedal and a little bit of delay. Just a little. And this guitar is tuned to an open E chord, like you strum it. It sounds like you're playing a bar chord, like an open E. It sounds like an open, it's an E. So if you play it here, that's an A, that's a B, E. It makes sense? So it's just, like a pedal steel is similar, it's tuned to E9. So I'll fake it with that, and I got these cool little levers that do very similar vibes to what the first two pedals on a pedal steel do. They raise the fifth to a sixth and the third to a fourth. So you can get some cool changes without moving your bar. And that's the sound though. I've got little compression. Yeah? Somebody?
Ghost.
Oh, in the machine. So, so that's the sound. I mean, that's when I'm faking a steel. And I'll... It's a cool sound, but that's the sound. I use those sounds, so that pedal. I use the compression and the reverb. That's the only time I really ever use it. And this gig ever, I never really turn either of those things on unless I'm playing slide. And if I'm playing slide like doing some blues stuff, I'll never turn the reverb on ever. You know, if you're you know, I just won't do it. They'll just maybe a slight bit of of delay, or not even anything. I'll just leave it totally dry, and it's a really aggressive, more aggressive sound. It's more of an aggressive, like way over the top sound. You don't really need no help for that, you know. You don't need no delay or reverb just getting in the way. But if I'm playing steel sounding stuff, I'll fake it with the compression. Because if you've ever played a steel, you hit a note, it'll just ring for days. Guitars don't really do that. They don't have the mass, you know. Steel's got like 10 times the amount of wood this thing has, so it'll just ring for ages. So that's what I use the compressor for, and the reverb, to fake a steel. And, well, if I'm playing like some sort of like boogie stuff, I'll use a little bit of delay. But, not delay, but reverb. And usually that comes from the amp. I'll use some sort of Fender amp, you know, and that has some nice reverb, and I'll use that. Or I have an external little reverb, tube reverb tank that I use for sessions. So I never really used this pedal, though, for anything other than that. All right, one more thing before you all start leaving. Don't leave yet. Gosh. No, I'm just joking. Here's a cool thing I do. In Brenton's band, we're a small band, and I wouldn't do this. I used to do this like big stereo thing. Then I realized nobody notices, so I stopped doing that. But now what I do is I'll use 2 amps, and I'll have 1 amp set up to just do this thing. And, oh, I forgot about this. I got a tremolo pedal. This little guy sitting on top, if everybody's, what's that little guy? It's just a little tremolo pedal. It's simple. Just... Probably my favorite effect in the world is tremolo. I love it. I'll put it on everything if I can, but people get tired of it. And it's not a lot of tremolo. It's not super heavy, this one. But it sounds nice. So that's it. That's basically everything except for this little Empress pedal, which I use to create a little pad with. We're a small band. We don't have a keyboard player we travel with. So what I'll do a lot of times is find out what key we're in. Say we're playing Hosanna. You guys know that song, Hosanna. So that intro is something like... No, it's not. Well, it has this little pad thing happening underneath that they did in the session. So what I'll do is I set this thing up as a little looper, and I set a very quick time. So the looping time is about, bam, it's about that long. So, and this is a volume pedal that's connected, that's controlling it. And I'll put a pretty heavy amount of delay on, maybe even a reverb just while I'm doing this, getting this sound set up. And what I'll do is it's a pretty washy sound, you know. But what I'll do is I'll turn this looper on, and it's looping very quick, and I'll swell into it. Maybe you get a couple different versions of the chord, a little hot. Turn that off and just let it do its thing, and I can control the amount of volume I want out of it. Then I have the option to play on top of it. So that's a cool little thing I do, if you were noticing that pad at all while we were playing. We don't use any tracks or anything, which is kind of nice. How am I doing on time? 5 minutes? Cool, man. I think that's like, that shows you pretty much all this stuff does, you know. If you guys have any questions, now's the time. You had a question? Yeah. Oh yeah. This has got a B bender on it. This guitar is called a Bluesman guitar. This guy in Nashville builds them. He builds them to sound and look kind of like old guitars, and he beats the crud out of them. But which I don't mind one way or the other. I don't care. I wouldn't care if it was shiny as long as it sounded and played like it does. I'd be happy. But that's his vibe. He likes to make them look like they've been around for many years. When this guitar is actually probably a year old. But he put this B bender in it. And it connects to the B string, and when I pull down on the neck with this lever, bends the B string up a half step. I use it for country sessions, and anytime I have the guitar on, I can't help but use it. This is the only guitar I have that has it. Now, if I bring a Les Paul, half the time with Brown, I'll bring a Les Paul, and it seems almost to fit the gig a little better than this guitar, but. I like this guitar, and it has this bender, and I can't help but use it when it's on there, I use it more than I should, but so it just does cool, does some pretty cool things, like if I play. It does, but it's a cowboy trick, but I use it in pop songs, a lot of the time. Just it's kind of cool. But. Yes?
You ever use the Marshall Blues Breaker pedal or a jackhammer?
Yeah, I've used them. I never the jackhammer, the Blues Breaker. Yeah, I used to have one. I think I've had a couple. Those have been around for years.
How are they compared to
With the amps cooking, can't tell the difference. I just can't tell the difference. But I'm sure they sound different. I think they may sound a little bit a little heavier than a tube screamer when you have a clean amp. But with the amps cooking, man, that's hard. You would be hard pressed to tell the difference between really anything overdrive pedal. Any other question? Yeah.
If you're in the kind of context where you have to isolate your cabinet in a side room or an ISO booth or whatever. In my experience, I found the tone suffers. If I'm using a 57 mic or whatever, I find that the tone of the amp suffers even with it cranked. Do you find that there's some ways to get better tone out of that?
Out of an amp in an isolation box?
Yeah.
One thing is that if you got a really hard surfaces in your isolation box, sounds bouncing around in there, you're getting, I think, what do you call them, flutter echoes, which never really sound good. They may be making it back in your amp. Deaden the box better, maybe. Deaden it really well, so it's really just picking up that one source, not all the bouncing around. That might help, but I'm usually pretty happy with that. I mean, that's what you do in sessions. In a session, you're in the control room, your amp's somewhere in another room. You're not in there with it, usually, unless, I think I got to wrap this thing up. What do I got? 1 minute? I had 1 minute 2 minutes ago. Cool. Shall I give my benediction? I don't know. Any final questions? As a quick one.
What kind of cables do you prefer? It doesn't matter.
Man, for live playing, I can't tell the difference between none of that stuff. I mean, a broken one, I know when it's broken, but in sessions. My head, when I'm doing sessions, I'm working on records, I go the extra mile with all that stuff. But for live playing, I don't know if I could tell the difference. But in a session where you're under a microscope, then I feel like maybe I can tell a difference. I use a bunch of different high-end cables. Probably I'm spending too much money on them. I think I am, but I don't know. It's hard to say. I think that's it. Thank you, guys.